Well, folks, suit up again because it's another episode here of the Soul Sessions. But today, folks, prepare your darkest desires and reveal those sins because the Square One Academy champion, Tony Sin, my friend, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure, my friend. But Tony, every guest has a story and every story has a beginning. How did your story begin as a wrestling fan?
As a wrestling fan, well, I'm a child of the Attitude Era, so
Oh,
I'm dyed in the wool, Stone Cold, The Rock. Pretty much like my first memory of wrestling, certainly that I can go back to, is watching WrestleMania 15, which is the one where Undertaker hangs Big Boss Man from Hell in a Cell. So it's like, yeah, that was a good place to start. And then just, yeah, sort of live through the Attitude Era and sort of seeing where it went. Yeah, no, it was a wild start.
oh, hell of a way to start, my friend. I mean, simple, nice match. Undertaker hanging a man in this hell. I mean, yeah, perfect. Best way to start, pal. But obviously that era is so important to people. It's where most people started, and people have a lot of great memories for it, and so many great memories they are. I want to know for yourself, Tony, what memories point out the Attitude Era for you as a fan? Like, these are just describe that era to a T.
Yeah. I think it's hard because I know sort of wrestling in general trades in moments, but I'm certainly more of a sort of character guy. So the long term story of a character and sort of what their arc is perhaps things that I go back to. So for me, I remember sort of So for me, the people that would stand out when I look back on that era would be obviously Stone Cold, who is hands down my favorite wrestler, and probably will be forever purely for nostalgic, that nostalgic feeling. But then once I'd sort of got to grips with what wrestling was, guys like RVD, Sabu, Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner is a massive guilty pleasure of mine. So yeah, it's more the characters that stood out. Kane as well. Kane and the Undertaker as a duo. The storyline where they're brothers or they kayfabe brothers, whatever, and then that going forward, how they'd feud and then they'd be back together and then they'd feud again, and it's just sort of never ending. You obviously had Paul Bearer tied in it as well, so yeah, it's those sort of guys.
Absolutely. They're all great stars. And but one I want to pick there, you mentioned Scott Steiner. Scott's an interesting fella, shall we say. And obviously, he's had sort of maybe two eras in his career as the tag team and as the single, daddy punk kind of guy with the whole chain and everything. For yourself, Tony, which version of Scott Steiner do you think is his best? Tag team with his brother, or do you think as the pump daddy with the whole metal gear on?
I think because the Steiner brothers had sort of come to an end by the time I really got into it. So although I was aware of it, and I was certainly aware of Rick Steiner, he was sort of, and I think looking back on it, his gimmick hadn't perhaps evolved as much. So when you compared Big Papa Pump to Rick Steiner as he was on his own, I was just sort of like, okay, well, Scott Steiner's way cooler and way better, and like look at the size of him. So then if I go back and watch the Steiner brothers, I can't help but shake that feeling that there's like, this is the beginning part of Scott Steiner, and they're amazing. They are incredible athletes, but in terms of pure, that wrestling thing that you can't quite describe, Scott Steiner just had it. The Big Papa Pump version had it. So yeah, no, I'd much prefer that. Definitely.
No, absolutely. And Scott's had so many great rivalries, and I think probably everyone agrees the best is him and Samoa Joe with those kind of mathematic promos. Would you agree that's the best of Scott's work?
I mean, it's one of the most mind-boggling wrestling promos you'll ever hear. But it's one of those things that, although it doesn't make any sense, you do know what he's talking about, because you can imagine that Scott Steiner does think that, and that is his concept of mathematics. So yeah, it's incredible.
Yes, Steiner theorem instead of Pythagoras theorem. It's taken all the rage now. Nat 5, Nat 4 classes, studying high school kids because you're learning the way to count like a Steiner. So fun all around. But obviously, you can't mention the Steiners without Rick's son, Braun Breaker, doing great stuff at NXT at the moment. What does it mean, like, as a fan of like the early days of the Steiner brothers, seeing Scott and then his brother, to see that generation continue? Because it's always great to see a generation of wrestlers continue.
Yeah, I look, as much as nepotism is quite a harmful thing in society, I do quite like the sort of the idea that you have these wrestling dynasties that go over generations. And of course, being a wrestler myself that doesn't have any connections or didn't have any previous connections in the wrestling world, I know how much it would help to have somebody that was already in the business. So, there are some people that have benefited from it and perhaps not deserved their place in where they ended up, as much as he's not around. But I think, David Flair never quite had it, but got a lot. But Braun he's definitely got it. So although he's had a helping hand, just his sort of, his raw attributes, I would say, would demand the spot that he's in anyway. I think he's the sort of person that they would take into the performance center, even if he wasn't a Steiner. But then the fact that you have that sort of inbuilt story to accompany that WWE, they're halfway there already.
Absolutely. And you mentioned dynasties there. I immediately think of like the Harts, the Flairs, Charlotte Flair, Maivia, High Chief Maivia to Rocky Johnson to The Rock. For yourself, Tony, if you could pick 4, like the Mount Rushmores of family dynasties within wrestling, who are you picking, my friend?
Oh, wow. What a question that is. So I would say, so Ric Flair and Charlotte Flair certainly are in there, despite what I just said about David Flair, which perhaps wasn't that fair. But Rick is, by most metrics, the best wrestler ever, I would say. If you look at sort of what he had as an impact on the industry and how he changed it, and also changed, he's still sort of referred back to it in popular culture. So he's probably the best ever. And then Charlotte Flair, who I personally would say is probably the best female wrestler ever, certainly in the top, 3 or 4. So for those two to be a sort of father-daughter duo, I'd say they're definitely in there. The Samoan dynasty, all as a complete, if you look at the sort of how their family tree branches out, and you're talking 3 or 4 generations, you've got The Rock, who is another one who people, if they said The Rock is the greatest wrestler ever, I would struggle to disagree. Obviously, Roman Reigns doing what he's doing at the moment, the whole bloodline thing. So they'd have to be in there. Do the McMahons count, or does it have to be in ring? Is that?
I mean, they've done some hell of a thing, but just a wee bit, the whole WWE thing, just a wee bit of a thing.
I'll have the McMahons in there as well, because that probably includes Triple H if you think of it by marriage, and obviously Vince is the guy that created modern wrestling as it is, and then you've got Shane, who obviously has some incredible moments, as does Stephanie, and then Triple H, who's as a wrestler had an amazing career, and then since he's sort of taken on a bit more of a authority role, without going back to what that gimmick was, he's done incredible stuff with NXT. So him as well. And then I would probably say, because they're entertaining me at the moment, it's a bit of a curve, I'll put the Guns in there as well, because badass Billy Gunn in his own right was one of, that tag team was incredibly over, and then what the Guns have done in their short while has been pretty impressive. They feel quite established and ready to go, and I think they've had that for quite a while. So yeah, I'm impressed with what I see, although I know their gimmick is to be annoying, and they do succeed in that, but I am quite impressed.
I love that you picked the Guns, because I remember when they won the AEW World Tag Team Championships and the internet was raging. Exactly. My God, they were pissed. But I think they did exceptional with what they've done, branking away from their father, doing their own sort of things, the many men entrance against FTR. Oh, beautiful. But obviously now they're in Bullet Club Gold as well, doing great things there. Do you think like Bullet Club Gold? Oh my God, that's a hell of a tongue twister to say. How the hell did Tony Khan pick this thing? Bullet Club Gold. There we go. Finally got it. Scottish tongue. It's not the best for these kind of abbreviated words. But seeing as you've got that club there, do you feel like that is going to be a next stepping stone for younger talent being associated with these big clubs?
Yeah, perhaps. And I think, Bullet Club being what it has been over the years has always been a bit of a sort of shape-shifting idea from what it was originally. And, it's perhaps unfair to compare it to the NWO, because I don't think it was ever really... The NWO has its definitive lineup, which is the original 3. And then thereafter, they sort of got added, people got added and it got too big at some point. But I think Bullet Club has always been designed to shapeshift in that, obviously their leaders at the beginning would get picked off by WWE, and then latterly, they got picked off by AEW. So they've always had to sort of evolve and go with it. So now they've, the Bullet Club Gold that's in AEW, I don't see why it couldn't be something like that, in that, you'll perhaps have Jay White will maybe be the leader for a while, and then the Guns will defect, and then you'll have someone else added in. It sort of goes like that. I don't see why not. And it's a brilliant idea, and it works. It's the beauty of factions in general, in that it gives lesser experienced guys a good platform to sort of, get attention without having all the spotlight on them, so they can perhaps make mistakes and they can obviously learn from those that are more experienced. So I'd be all for it if that's what they wanted to do with that.
Yeah, of course, absolutely a great learning opportunity. But obviously, you mentioned, Tony, you were a fan of the Attitude Era as a kid. Wrestling go through many eras: ruthless aggression, PG, to modern day, to now what people are calling kind of like the streaming marketing era. And those eras were kind of influenced by outside means. And I want to know from yourself, Tony, seeing wrestling evolve, what outside influences do you think helped shape that? Was it sort of like media or culture? What do you think, pal?
Yeah, good question. I think really WWE's biggest defining moment since WCW folding and them sort of being the biggest players in town for 15 years before AEW came along. I know TNA sort of had its time, but never felt like a proper threat. But I think the biggest thing that changed WWE was going from TV. I think it was TV 13 in the Attitude Era and the Ruthless Aggression Era into the PG era, obviously, and that coincided with the Benoit incident. So I think that's what probably had the biggest effect on it. And then in terms of outside influences, although it's perhaps not the same as, I think what again changed WWE was AEW coming along and actually giving them genuine competition and how they had to sort of change things. But I think in terms of what's made wrestling or what's changed wrestling from an outside perspective would be people's attention spans shortening in general in society. So that all forms of entertainment has had to sort of become more, bite size and, sort of off the cuff in a way. And I think that's affected wrestling in that now a lot of wrestlers are just trying to create GIFs and those sort of moments that can be condensed into like a 10-second clip that can be put on Twitter, which, if you like that style of wrestling, which I personally do, I'm all for it. But I think there's a lot of people that are perhaps a bit more traditional in their wrestling style that thinks just chasing spots and chasing likes is perhaps not the most productive thing. And, there are guys that are taking massive risks and taking big bumps. So, in 10, 15 years time, whether or not they will, wish they hadn't taken some of the bumps and taken some of the risks, only time will tell. And, they'll be the ones that will know. So, but yeah, I think it's had a massive effect.
Of course, absolutely. And you mentioned those kind of chasing moments for like GIFs and memes and buzzwords. We're seeing like now a lot of outside marketing influence come into wrestling. Just last night on AEW Dynamite, they had the Texas Chainsaw Death match with Jarrett and Hardy. Go to WWE, they've had the Mountain Dew Pitch Black match. They had Cinnamon Toast Crunch at WrestleMania, as well as some. I remember it was like I was in there for Edge and Finn's match, and then the whole Titantron played, and it was some advertisements of some horror movie. It was like, well, what the fuck? This just played us. And do you think like we're now kind of in like that marketing age where more outside companies are going to have like their own advertised matches?
Yeah, I'm not against it because I always find they're quite entertaining. So, as long as you don't take them to be anything sort of serious and part of a storyline, and you just take them for what they are in terms of like an exhibition style match, then why not? If it's bringing more money into the industry and people are getting paid off it, then it can't be seen as a bad thing. And, like you said, the Mountain Dew match was incredible with the sort of neon paint and neon lights. And like, I'm a huge Fiend / Bray Wyatt apologist, so I'm all for that ridiculous stuff. But I think the ones that stick in my mind would be the KFC table matches they used to do. It was like, I think it was like the KFC banquet table match. I think that's what it was officially tagged as. That was really something, because it also meant, I'm partial to a KFC myself, but it also meant that someone was going through a table and the table was likely to be covered in chicken and gravy, and that meant someone is going to get covered in it. So I'm all for it, as long as it doesn't start, encroaching in, say, like main events, and you don't all of a sudden have Hell in a Cell sponsored by Dr. Pepper or whatever. Then it's fine in my book.
Well, hey, look, if WWE come up here and we get an Iron Brew sponsored match, I'll be a happy man. I will be a happy man. I ain't got no complaints. But you mentioned someone who I think is really great, Bray Wyatt, who was previously The Fiend, came back and he's done some stuff just now. I want to know your thoughts on Bray coming back and like this whole character he's going around with Uncle Howdy. Do you think it's sort of like a spiritual successor to The Fiend, or do you think maybe it's not connecting as well as it should be?
No, I don't think it has connected in the same way. And actually, they've sort of shuffled it off screen slightly, really, since the LA Knight feud. It's been laying quite low. And it didn't. The Fiend. I really enjoyed the Fiend, and it sort of started to become a bit too. I don't know. They got a bit silly and perhaps didn't have it. It was almost like they didn't have a plan for it, and they would just sort of let it be. And they knew it was quite popular, but they didn't want it to be this sort of all-conquering heel like some characters that come along. So that was a struggle. I think going back to, or a sort of variation of the Firefly Funhouse character, the guy that was the sort of kids TV character sort of guy. I think doing some sort of variation of that, I think there's success there, because I think it's got the fact that it can talk, the character, but it also means he can do matches. And I know he did a few matches of it where he was a sort of like glutton for punishment and he would just get beaten down. But if they could somehow evolve it so he could be like, I don't know, maybe psychotic, or I don't know what it would be exactly, but I think that in terms of a happy medium of not being this complete rambling mess that some Bray Wyatt characters and promos do end up like, but also having his own unique style, which the Funhouse did have. And then you can always have people sort of interacting with it thereafter. I think the biggest mistake they made with Bray, amongst a lot of them, was letting Seth burn down the Funhouse quite early on in its existence, because it then immediately meant that Funhouse was like a physical thing that was in the arena sort of thing. Whereas I always at first quite liked it as the Funhouse. I know the Funhouse existed, but it was almost like this thing in the Fiend's mind sort of thing that never actually came and was seen on, in the ring or anything like that. But as soon as Seth could breach the walls, it suffered, because it just normalized it basically. And with a Bray style character, as soon as it becomes normalized anyway, it loses its effect, because it then can just be seen as very silly. And it's constantly, all of Bray's characters are right on that line of trying to be taken seriously, but they're just a little bit silly. So as soon as you start taking chances with it, it's the writing's on the wall.
Of course, absolutely. And at the moment now, Bray's away from wrestling because of health issues, and people don't know when he's going to come back. But when he comes back, I want to know from yourself, Tony, as a fan of Bray especially, should he come back as what he's doing now, or embrace the Fiend again? I personally think the Fiend, because not only will it be a good thing of like story-wise, and it was a loved character, but you got to look at like the business side of it, because that guy sell merch like an absolute hotcake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that is a good reason. Perhaps the only thing that you could say with it is, would it be a bit of a regression, like sort of going back to an old character when the Fiend, it wasn't as if they killed. Well, I think they did kill the Fiend off in the end, but when the new character came back, the Uncle Howdy character, the Fiend was definitely still sort of mentioned as part of that act sort of thing. So they haven't completely distanced themselves from it, but to go back to just being the Fiend, I don't know, maybe it'd be a step back, but I'd welcome him back, and I'd be interested to see what he comes back with, because I think he's got the talent to put a lot of things over, or to actually make them seem halfway decent. So yeah, I would welcome him back. And in the Fiend guys, perhaps I get it from a merch standpoint, but from an entertainment standpoint, perhaps they've done all they can with it. Because if they'd run dry, and like I said, they were just sort of jumping from one idea to another by the end. So unless they have a long-term story in mind for him, or a sort of long-term development, maybe try something else.
Mm-hmm. Of course, something that seemed like was teased that they were going back to as well was Alexa Bliss aligning with Bray again. I mean, that didn't seem like it was necessarily needed. I mean, why do you think they were so adamant, before Bray left and everything, of maybe putting Alexa back with Bray?
I think because Alexa is also popular, and Alexa was just a sort of another part of the act. And it's, again, it was, I quite liked what they did with the Alexa development to begin with, but then it just became silly again. It went too over the top, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe it is just doomed to become this like silly act because of what it is and what modern times are. But if they had, say, because there was talk of turning Alexa into Sister Abigail and actually making the Sister Abigail character a living thing, and that could have been interesting. I know there was also talk of doing like the Wyatt Six, which was part of this most recent sort of comeback, and that was going to have. I think the idea was meant to be that it was meant to be the sort of the Funhouse characters would all become living beings, and they would have a faction basically made up of like, you know, the puppets, which, you know, I would have given it a go, because it's at least I whatever you say about WWE, they're sort of their budget for production and their actual standards are incredible. So I'd have liked to have seen what they could have done with that, and then what they actually did with the characters perhaps wouldn't have worked. But to have just seen them for 3 months before it falls off a cliff, that would have been interesting. And I think if they had Alexa Bliss as part of that, then yeah, great, because I think she's also awesome. But is she now pregnant? I think.
Yeah, she's away on a maternity leave at the moment.
Right. Okay. So that's not going to happen at all. That's going on the back burner. But yeah, before she started doing the like the swing set stuff, I was into the Alexa element of the Fiend character.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hopefully we can see great things from these two performers in the future. But Tony, yourself as well, because obviously you would go and decide to become a wrestler as well and go into training. I want to know the story behind that. What was it that drove you to say, you know what, let's give this a go? It's
just been a childhood sort of dream in a way, or a sort of, a goal that I've always wanted to do. And I'd looked from, I'd say about 18 to maybe 26, 27. I had looked 2 or 3 times to try and find a school near me. And I just couldn't find the right one, whether or not the schools that are around here weren't advertising, or they weren't really what they are today. But the only ones that I could find would really be sort of like East London or up in Nottingham. And it was just too far for me to travel on a regular basis. You're probably talking like an hour and a half in both directions. And then during lockdown, when I had, obviously had a lot of time on my hands, as everybody did. And then I got really into wrestling again, because it was one of the only things that was on. So I was just watching it one day, and I thought, you know what, I might as well have a look for a school, and found the school that I train at was, I've always trained at, and it's about half an hour away from me. So I signed up. I then had to wait 3-4 months until lockdown restrictions were lifted, and then just threw myself into it and haven't looked back.
Oh, well, hey, well done, my friend. And obviously, the physical aspect of wrestling is important as well, but obviously learning the mindset and, developing that is also important as well. And it's one of those things they do is seminars, and there's so many great minds to pick. I want to know, Tony, if you could have a dream seminar with someone and pick their mind on wrestling, who would you like to have?
Wow. I mean, it'd be hard to say not sending anyone other than Stone Cold, because it would also mean meeting my favorite wrestler. Okay. But I think if it was someone who is close-ishly linked to my character in terms of what I think I'd get out of it, I actually think I'd say The Miz. And I know that might be sort of, it might come as a shock to people, but in terms of what he's done, he's not necessarily the most gifted of athletes, despite clearly being a good athlete, but he's not by mainstream wrestling standards a standout athlete, but has always managed to seem legitimate, has always had, he's been very good at playing the game. So I think that would be interesting to sort of get his insight into how to negotiate the politics of wrestling. And also his style of sort of doing quite a lot with very little. And he's the sort of person that's very good communicating and getting his act over verbally as much as it is in rings. So I think I'd learn a lot from him if I could do something with him.
Well, hey Tony, if that leads to a Sin and Misses show on Channel 4, I'll take it any day of the week, mate.
100%.
But obviously, I want to talk about as well, a great place as well, Square One Academy. I've had many that have gone there, Adonis Payne, Tig, and Arthur Scutto. And for our viewers maybe not familiar with Square One, could you explain what Square One is like?
Honestly, I think it's the best facility in the country. I haven't traveled around the country seeing every school, but when I meet people at shows and sort of once you get to know them and hear about their journey, I haven't heard of a school yet that has both the ring set up all the time So a lot of schools that you'll go to, even ones that are run by, WWE level people, they will only have set windows that you can train in because they don't own their premises or they don't lease their premises. So you'll have, say, training 6 to 8 every Wednesday, and you'll have to turn up and you'll have to set the ring up, train, take the ring down, and it's very sort of regimented. Whereas Square One, we have access to the unit, I think, from 6 a.m. in the morning till 11 at night. The ring is always set up, and all you have to do is tighten the ropes. You can book ring time on your own, so you don't necessarily have to train with an instructor or whatever. And on top of that, we then also have, as part of so we pay a monthly membership. As part of the membership, you get unlimited classes. So the classes we have, our beginners, we have 2-hour sessions a week. We have a sort of intermediate class that's 2 hours a week. We have a sort of finishing school type class with our booker, who's Paul Ash, who's been doing it 25 years. So, is a master at this. And then on top of that, we also have a fully functioning strongman gym attached to the unit. So when you take in all three of those things and put them together, the package that Square One provides is, it's phenomenal. It is as professional as you could expect in British wrestling. It is, it's unbelievable. Because it's the only school that I've ever been to, it took me quite a while to realize how lucky we were. So, when I was sort of first coming up, and the guy that taught me from sort of very beginners level was Tommy Kyle, and we were his first intake of students. He had just started doing it after lockdown, because that's when everything sort of fell into place in terms with the unit. And it felt already that he was like, an experienced teacher or coach, and that we were sort of in really good hands. But it's only once you start talking to other people and realizing that actually, no, they didn't benefit from that. They would just turn up to classes and have, the classes would be massive for a start. So our classes are limited to between 8 and 12, depending on what level you're doing. Whereas a lot of classes, the amount of people there will be into the 20s. So the actual contact time and the amount of learning time is way thinner spread in other schools. So it's an unbelievable facility, and I would recommend anyone that's in the sort of Southeast Midlands area to check it out, because it's something special.
Definitely as well, and it's such great to see, that they give you the time to have that kind of like a one-on-one sessions and learn and adapt and do what you can do. Is there any particular advice you've gotten from like that time in Square One that you really hold to your chest? Like, this is my mantra of wrestling.
I think there's two things, and I think two things which are perhaps the truest things in wrestling, which is one, the moves don't matter, which is, they do matter at a certain point, but in terms of actually getting over with the crowd, it is much easier and a much, you're going to last a lot longer if you work on your sort of character side of it first. And that's the most important thing in wrestling. We sort of, Paul Ash, who tried to explain it first to me, explained what he calls the 5-second rule. So you've got 5 seconds from the time you come out of the curtain to those 5 seconds to win over the crowd. Because if they decide that you're boring, and be that, it's not necessarily being like someone they like or want to boo or whatever. It's just if they think you are a sort of boring or middle of the road, or you're not quite like standing out, then they'll just switch off. That's the first thing. And that is the most important thing in wrestling, I think. And then the second thing in terms of actually in ring would just be slow it down and just it's not sort of wandering around the ring really slowly. It's more just a case of once you do whatever you're doing with a bit of intensity, and then let it breathe and wait a couple of seconds. Not even seconds. It's probably even like 10 seconds, which feels like a long time. But in terms of when you're watching a match, is nothing at all, because you need to let everything register. And then, towards the back end of a match, you can pick it up if you want to. But certainly. But from a character standpoint, it is just master who you are first, and then what you do after that.
Absolutely. And you've done so well because you became the Square One Academy champion, so you've done something well, my friend. What did it mean to you to win that championship?
It was one of the first. So the very first goal I had when I was training was to just have a match, just to be deemed like good enough, safe enough to have a match. And then after that, it was wanting to have a title. And yeah, I won it probably 6 months ago, and it was just an unbelievable feeling. Like, it's the sort of thing, like, I forgot to, once you've won it, you're meant to have like a new promo pic taken so that they can use that in all the all the promotional material. I just completely forgot about that because I was out like taking pictures with people that were there, even though, being a bad guy or whatever, but people did still want to get pictures with the new champ. That sounds so wanky, but people are there for you. Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of, so I just got caught up in that. And then when I got home, and I struggled to sleep after shows anyway, especially shows that are sort of the nighttime shows. But that night I got to sleep, I think at like 4:30 in the morning, because you're just constantly like playing back the match. And I was, I was lucky in that I had a decent match to win the title as well. So it's something that I look back fondly on. And yeah, it was just, it's the best feeling I've had in wrestling thus far, for sure.
Absolutely, and it's a hell of a title as well. I mean, as soon as they do replicas, I'll be buying one and getting you to sign it, mate, and have that mounted on my bar. So that'll be stunning as well. But something I love in wrestling as well, custom titles. Jay Briscoe had the Ring of Honor one he customized, John Cena spinner, MJF with the Triple B. Tony, if you could, customize the Square One Academy Championship to resemble yourself, how would you do it?
Good question. I think I'd go with a snake skin, maybe like a sort of snake skin strap. Because that's my gear snake skin. So I'd go with that, and then rather than the the panels at the moment are sort of silver and red, similar to the TNT belt that I see you've got behind you. So it's a lovely belt as well. I would probably go with like a sort of matte black, so the whole thing sort of with a sort of like a reddish tint to it. So yeah, very, very sort of on brand.
That'll be very classy. And those belts, there's stories behind them that broke my bank account and got through customs. So there's just fun stories behind those belts, I'll tell you one day, my friend. But obviously, you've had so many opponents as well, Philip Bedwell and Sunset Skip. Out of the opponents you faced, my friend, was there one that you felt like you honestly thought, yeah, they're going to take it off me?
No, sorry, no, but not really. I mean, I consider myself to be on a never-ending title run now. This is sort of, we're 6 months into infinity at this point. So no, I wouldn't say so. Certainly, of course, I've faced some great talents, not to diminish them, but in terms of them being a threat. But guys like Jackson Hart and Hugo Bloom, who are very different wrestlers in terms of Hugo Bloom's a complete powerhouse, and Jackson Hart is more of a sort of high flyer, despite being incredibly strong himself. And they're great, and they will go on to do great things. Phil Bedwell has done great things. Sunset Skip, actually, the match that was meant to happen with Sunset Skip never happened, and he's ducked me 4 or 5 times now. So yeah, so he obviously knows he can't beat me. Phil Bedwell has tried. The other 2 of their little crew, Paul Ash is part of it, and he's only just coming back out of retirement. And RJ Singh is, way too long in the tooth to be trying it with me. So yeah, no, I'm pretty confident I won't be losing it anytime soon.
Oh, well, hey, it shows they're all scared of you, champ. They're scared to go up and get you in the ring. But obviously, 6 months, then a year. A year would be a hell of a compliment for you. If you had to celebrate a year as the Square One champion, what would you do? You got confetti, balloons, you got party animals. What have you got?
I would set up a Holy Communion, but everyone would also have to be christened or baptized depending on what their level of religiousness is currently. So I'd basically take probably 3 hours. Everyone would have to line up. You come in, you get christened, then you do communion, or you get baptized. And if I could, I mean, most of our shows take place in Stevenage, which is a landlocked county. But if I could do it by a flowing river and properly be dunking people in the river and then letting them go, that's how I'd like to do it, definitely.
Well, who knows? Maybe we might get a match in a stream or something like that. It could be hell of a...
I'd 100% be up for it. I know wrestling and water have always, they'd struggle to coexist, but yeah, I'd give it a go.
Well, hey, you never know in the business of wrestling. But obviously you mentioned, Square One's kind of like southern, we've got, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. And I feel like each part of the UK's wrestling scene is different. It's got its own identity. Scotland has Wales and England and Northern Ireland. For England, my friend, what identity do you think it is for that part of the country? Do you think it's like a strong style, technical storytelling? What is English wrestling at the end of the day?
Good question. I think English wrestling has perhaps always had a bit of more of a world of sport type feel to it than the stuff up north. I think up north has always been a bit grittier, and certainly if you look at the sort of talents that come out now, they are more of that sort of shoot style of wrestlers. So, MMA adjacent style of wrestling. Whereas, down south, we've perhaps always more focused on the showmanship and the sort of the silly side of it, which I don't know whether or not you'd say that's better. It depends on what your taste is. And we do, we nowadays do produce a few more athletes, guys like Osprey, who is a Southerner and perhaps has mixed all of it. But I would say in terms of when I look around and we go to the shows that we're doing, and I know the people that are booking it, leaning into that silliness is where our strength has always lied, I think.
Absolutely, indeed. And great stars coming out of not just England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland altogether. The whole UK wrestling scene is buzzing, especially with, Clash of the Castle, Money in the Bank, and now All In. But I want to know from yourself, Tony, as, a British wrestler, what does it mean to you to see these big companies finally coming back for shows?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. It really has been a long time coming, because I think British wrestling British wrestling fandom has always been quite strong. So it seems weird that they wouldn't capitalize on the strength of the market, especially because you never struggle with the language barrier or anything like that. So your characters can come over, they can just perform as if they were in America. I think culturally very similar. So it seems strange that they didn't do it for a while. We're talking, it was probably 20 going on 20 years between Insurrection, which is the biggest, the last big WWE or WWF, was it back then? I can't remember. It was one of the two. It was right on the verge. And then Clash at the Castle. And Clash at the Castle was good. I was at the show, and it was good because it was obviously, the size of the crowd. But in terms of what they did story-wise, they didn't give us a huge amount. They only did. I mean, you had the Dominic turn, which was something, especially what it then went on to become. But it felt almost house showy in a way. But then Money in the Bank, the one that's just been, was a incredible show. So they really made up for that. And then All In, I'm lucky enough to be going to All In, so I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's it's starting to take shape. It's perhaps been a bit of a sort of short build in terms of what they would normally do, and it's also hampered by the fact they've got the Chicago show All Out the week after. So I think trying to sort of spread what their big matches are have been it's been difficult from a booking perspective. But yeah, it should be an incredible night at Wembley, because there's just so many people, and I think AEW's got enough buzz about it still that it does really feel like it's going to be a momentous occasion. Whether or not they end up doing something with storylines to try and sort of crystallize that in people's minds, I don't know. I don't know really where they are currently in their storylines, what would be considered to be a huge, massive shock, unless you get some sort of turn, and I don't know what that could be. But in terms of, the main event, I don't think MJF is losing to Adam Cole. So it might have to be, if they are going to do something like that, or they might just say the atmosphere will be enough to make people remember it. So we'll see, but it should be a good night, as long as it doesn't rain, which is always a worry with any stadium show. It's going to be incredible.
Yeah, I think if it does rain, you're going to see a bunch of 80,000 drunken UK fans shouting at the clouds for 20 minutes.
Exactly.
Bastards. Bastard rain. But I do want to, before we touch upon AEW All In, I want to go back to Clash of the Castle, because I was there as well. Hell of a night, hell of an event. But I've always asked people this who attended, which was the better match, Sheamus and Gunther or Drew and Roman?
I would say Sheamus and Gunther. I think so. I think it was a little bit more hard hitting, and it was a bit less predictable. Like, I thought Sheamus was actually going to win. So when Gunther went over, I was quite shocked by that. Whereas I think with the Drew thing, people had convinced themselves that they were gonna take the title of Roman, and I wasn't one of them. I was telling the people that I went, I was like, you are crazy if you think they're gonna end this, one of the most monumentous title runs in history at this point, if they're gonna end it in the UK to Drew. And Drew, Drew's great, but he's not been built up to take the title. He was just built up to be in the main event for that show. So yeah, it was never happening. So yeah, no, I'd definitely go Gunther Sheamus. Like Gunther's style for his size, I'm just a huge fan of it because it's so simple, but it's effective as well.
Yeah, dude's a damn powerhouse as well. And it was also a sad day in Scotland when Drew won. We never get a goddamn victory up here. Never for the Scottish people. But obviously, AEW All In, you mentioned Ospreay, and Ospreay's been announced to face Jericho. And I think it's going to be a great match, a fun match. From yourself, Tony, as well, do you think Ospreay and Jericho is a good matchup, or do you think there might have been somebody else better for Ospreay's caliber?
I think there would have been better. There would have been better wrestlers for what Ospreay can do, because Jericho, he's a legend at this point, but his matches are quite slow and methodical. And whether or not that will mesh with Ospreay, I don't know. And I think the other problem they've got, because I was watching it earlier, catching up, Jericho's being presented as the face in it, and it's obviously, it's in Wembley, whether or not Ospreay isn't just going to get the hometown reception. I know he's sort of, he's a heel wherever he goes, but he is still sort of, he's one of our own in a way. So whether or not the crowd will be sort of unsure what to do, but yeah, it'll be a good match. Whether or not it would have been the match that I would have booked, no, because I probably would have done the rubber match between him and Kenny in the UK. But then that also means you'd perhaps have to put Ospreay over, and it's would Kenny agree to that? But if I had my way, that would be my dream match for it, definitely.
That would have been a hell of a banger as well. I would have loved to have seen Ospreay and Pac. That would have been cool.
Oh,
Just UK talent kicking arse. But obviously, another match that was announced: Blackpool Combat Club versus Eddie, Lucha Bros, Best Friends, and Orange Cassidy. But the Blackpool Combat Club have got 3 unknown opponents, and I like to think they're going to be from the UK wrestling scene. Tony, if you had to pick 3 UK talent to be members of the Blackpool Combat Club for the Stadium Stampede match, who would you want to see?
Yeah, because I was that's literally the point that I got up to. So is it Eddie, the Lucha Brothers, and then all 3 are best friends? Is that
yes?
It? There's 6 of them, and then it's versus 3. Okay, fine. That has cleared it up in my mind first. But I wasn't sure whether or not they were doing a 4-on-4, and they only had to find Blackpool Combat Club only had to find a 4th member, or whether or not. Okay, so they've got to find 3. They've got to find 3 members and people that would suit the Blackpool Combat style. Okay, so I think the first one is the guy that you had on recently, Arthur Scurro, who's up and coming, but is like a sort of big, tough, just really hard style wrestler. He sails the 7 seas, and he's really got it. So I think he'd be one of them. Who else? I would put. Who would I put in there? I'd probably put I'll put Tommy Kyle in there as well, because actually he's like got a big MMA sort of background, of MMA influenced style, and he's sort of, I think he would suit it. And then the 6th person would be Regal's son, who's training in WWE now, just because I'd like the whole, going back to sort of wrestling families, I'd quite like the synergy and the sort of full circle storytelling of if Regal's son has broken his WWE contract to make 1 appearance at Wembley. Yeah, I'm all for that.
Oh, that would be a story in itself. I'm sure Dave Meltzer would have a goddamn brain meltdown over that happening. But, I also want to see, maybe some like big independent stars, get their moment to shine for such a historic UK show, like the likes of Big Damo, Session Moth Martina, and another one I want to see, give me Grado. Give me Grado's Madonna entrance in Wembley. Tony, look, you've paid money for big songs. Look, I'll take Madonna in Wembley against Jarrett. For the love of fuck, please do it, Tony. You got to agree that would be a hell of a moment, right?
Well, I think it might be your Scottish bias coming a little bit, saying that you want Grado to be there. I mean, look, Grado's great, but I don't know whether or not he's got like megastar potential that some of them have. Big Damo, I think Big Damo is, he's great. He's sort of maybe a little bit one-dimensional, and I think that's what's held him back. I think it has been his issue, in that he's sort of like, he obviously is a big, powerful hoss guy, but perhaps can't convey that enough. Session Moth Martina is incredible. I would say the one person just I'd love to see him performing at Wembley would be Man Like DeReiss. Because if he could come out and do the whole entrance with the rapping and everything, I think that would be special if he could do it.
Oh, that would be cool as well. Another guy I'm thinking, like him, Malachi Black would be magic. Sadly, he's injured. Cannon Noir. Oh, that would be stunning as well. So much just shows we've got so much great talent. And hopefully with All In, more great stuff will happen for us. WrestleMania, UK. I hope to see that happen. But one thing I'm very interested about is where. A lot of people say Wembley. Some people say Principality in Wales. I mean, I'm just saying Murrayfield so I don't have to travel far. I would like to, have a nice, easy walk to an arena once instead of trains. But for yourself, Tony, where would you like to see WrestleMania held in the UK?
I mean, yeah, my gut reaction is Wembley, but that's because it's the biggest stadium. It's the one that's up there with the most modern stadiums that we've got. I know obviously there'll be Spurs fans that say we've got the most modern stadium ever, but that's by the by. Yeah, I think Wembley because it is just our sort of iconic stadium, but then also thinking of it from a practicality standpoint, WrestleMania usually takes place in April, and I don't know. Well, I assume they would do it UK time. That would be the first thing, because I don't think the Wembley curfew can be extended to suit US pay-per-view times. Like they're not going to have a show on at 4 a.m. or whatever. So I would say, just to be on the safe side with the rain, I would probably do the Principality again, because it's got the size, it's got the capability of hosting that many people, and it's obviously got the roof as well. So I would go with that. And also, if I was lucky enough to get tickets, a weekend in Cardiff is always welcome. So yeah, I'd be well up for that.
Oh, very true. And hopefully for this time, no train strikes are going to get in the way. No London King Cross shutting down, for the love of God. Train companies, sort your shit out, for the love of God. But, Tony and my friend, it's been an absolute pleasure here having you on the Soul Sessions. But before we go, a final question as well I want to ask. UK wrestling scene is so important. Independence up and down, TNT, Rev Pro, Progress, ICW up here in Scotland, OTT in Northern Ireland, and No Mercy in Wales. For your future, my friend, if you had to pick a company from Scotland, from Northern Ireland, from Wales, and from England to end up going to and having a wee match for, which of those companies would you like to have? And we'll start first with my home turf of Scotland.
Yeah, I think ICW. If you look at the talent that has gone through ICW in the sort of that late noughties, early teens phase, it was incredible in some of the matches they were putting on. So yeah, I would go with there. Northern Ireland, you would really be testing my knowledge if I had to give you a promotion from Northern Ireland. I don't know any. That's perhaps my fault. But I would look. I think I'd get real heat in Northern Ireland if I did go over. There's the sort of, I know they're not Irish, and I'm not going to get into those grounds. But I think what Southern English wrestlers do have against pretty much every other region of the UK, even if it's Northern England, is that they sort of dislike us as immediately as soon as they hear our accent. So you'd always have that in your back pocket. Welsh, I would probably say New Force based in Wales. I'm not actually sure. It might be. I think they are. We'll go with New Force anyway, because I do want to work them, so I'll get them in there. And then look, I mean, if it was an English promotional one that's based more in England, and it came down to a shootout between Progress and Rev Pro, I think I'd go Rev Pro, and I know that might be shooting myself in the foot in terms of potential future bookings, but I think Rev Pro has, I think, always had slightly better talent, even if it's imported talent. They do sort of have slightly better talents, and they also run shows regularly at York Hall, and York Hall is one of my favourite venues in the UK, not just for wrestling, but for anything else as well. I've seen some boxing shows there, and it's incredible. So to be able to work that venue would be special for me. So yeah, no, I'd go there.
Well, it looks like we're going to get the UK tour of the Sinner. I mean, hey, I'm all for it, my friend. But thank you, Tony, for tuning in for an episode of the Soul Sessions. And folks, if you want to follow the journey of the Sinner, you can find Tony's Instagram link of the video. You click that, follow him, and see what's going on his journey. Well, Tony, thank you for tuning in. And folks, thank you for watching another episode here of the Soul Sessions.